Hi, this is Daisy Glassburn, Chair of the Board of Real Estate Appraisers. Today is April 3rd, 2025. It is 9 o'clock. This is a public meeting of the Board of Real Estate Appraisers. We'll call the meeting to order and begin with having the Division Director perform roll call.
Daisy Glassburn,
Here.
Clint Taylor,
Here.
Brent Goff,
Here.
Rob Stylo,
Here.
Darius Wise.
Here.
You're all present. You have a quorum.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is Attorney General Matters for Complaint 2024-430. This is Daisy Glassburn. Again, it is April 3rd, 2025, and the time is 9:01. This is a meeting of the Colorado Board of Real Estate Appraisers. I move that the board enter into executive session pursuant to section 246402-3A2 of the Colorado Revised Statutes to receive legal advice on specific legal questions concerning this complaint number 2024-430. Do I have a second on the motion?
This is Brent Goff. I'll second that.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say no. We have 5 votes on record. We'll move to executive session now. We have everybody here. Okay, the time is 9:57 and the board is now back in open session. Zach, did you want to go over what the violations are for this case?
Yeah, so we had an investigative report, initial, and then at the request of the respondent, we had a supplementary investigative report by an independent contractor, Joshua Wallet, who's here today to answer any questions you might have. And so between those two reports, we have the following violations were found by the investigators. Violation of section 1210-6131B, board rule or appraisal statute violation. 3 violations of section 1210-6131G, acted in a manner that does not meet the generally accepted standards of professional appraisal practice as adopted by the board by rule. Section 1210-6131F, conducted appraisal in a fraudulent manner or used misrepresentation. 2 violations of Colorado Revised Statute 1210-613K, engaged in conduct that would be grounds for denial of a license or certification. 3 violations of Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, or USPAP, scope of work rule. 2 violations of USPAP record keeping rule. 1 violation of USPAP competency rule. 4 violations of the USPAP ethics rule. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 1-1, correctly employ recognized methods to produce a credible result. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 1-1B, substantial error or admission error of omission or commission. USPAP standards rule 1-1C, rendered services in a careless or negligent manner. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 1-2, scope of work determined to produce credible assignment. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 1-2E, failure to identify relevant property characteristics. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 1-2H, failure to adhere to scope of work. 2 violations of USPAP standards 1-4, failure to collect, verify, and analyze all information necessary for a credible assignment. 1 violation of USPAP standards 1-4A, failure to adequately complete sales comparison approach. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 1-5, analyze all agreements of sale. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 1-6A, failure to reconcile quality and quantity of data with approaches used. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 1-6B, failure to reconcile the applicability and relevancy of approaches and methods. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 2-1, clearly and accurately set forth appraisal in a manner that's not misleading and contains information sufficient to understand the report. USPAP standards rule 2-1A, failure to clearly and accurately set forth the appraisal in a manner that is not misleading. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 2-1B, failure to contain sufficient information to enable intended users to understand the appraisal. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 2-1C, failure to disclose all assumptions and conditions. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 2-2A, contents of report must be appropriate for intended use. 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 2-2A8, failure to summarize the scope of work. And 1 violation of USPAP standards rule 2-2AX5, failure to summarize information and support for analysis. And both Rob and Josh are here if you have any questions about their investigative reports.
This is Daisy. This case is unfortunate in that initially when it was brought before the board, the recommendation was a stipulation, a small fine, and some coursework regarding the review of the report specifically. And now it has escalated to the interactions of witnesses and things of that nature. Initially, the report wouldn't have warranted this type of Recommendations on the board. Is there any other discussion?
Are we losing Daisy in terms of her audio?
Missed
I-
the last part there, Daisy.
Let's see, I don't know how far back to go. Just
Just
to
the end.
summarize, I was just wondering if there was any other discussion.
Yeah, this is board member Goff. I wanted to talk with one of the investigators, Josh Wallet. Josh, are you there?
Excuse me, I am here.
Yeah, I want to thank you for the very thorough analysis of the case. And was at the end of the day, did the appraiser not want to submit to an interview to you? Was he refusing to answer your questions?
Let me explain. There were two requests for interviews to the respondent by me. So the respondent did have an interview, and by interview I mean the typical live Zoom or phone interview with the initial investigator. And in December of 2024, I had a live Zoom interview with the respondent. We decided on a mutually agreed date and time. And then later on in January of 2025, I wanted to clarify and get more information about some of his communications so I could understand sort of how those communications were characterized. And I asked for another live Zoom interview. And the respondent did select a date and a time. I set aside almost an entire day because I wanted to make it available. He did select a time of his choosing. And then about 20 minutes before that time, he emailed me saying he would not be conducting the live interview, but he wanted to only answer questions by email, which was not typical for the respondent previously, as well as any other witnesses. So it's not very productive to simply produce a list of questions by email, because oftentimes the answers will sort of create new questions that you need to ask, and that's why the live interchange is important. So and in that January request, he had requested either questions or the topics, and I did give him specifically the topics I was going to ask, which I thought was very fair. Because it was a second interview I was asking him for, and it was a very specific intent, and that was for me to understand better his communications with witnesses. And so really at that point, all I had to go on was the plain language of his emails that he had made to witnesses, the information he had told me during the first interview, as well as there was a response as well that related to sort of characterizing what his comments were all about to witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Wallet. And were you engaged secondarily after the initial investigation? And what were the terms of your engagement? I understand you weren't doing an appraisal review. What were you doing for the board?
Right. Yes. So I was engaged by the board. The Attorney General was given the case by the board, and then engaged me to assist in the board investigation. That was in November of 2024. I was engaged, and I was engaged for impartial professional opinions about the case related to the report, the appraisal report, as well as other communications. And this was the we could say the broad general scope of what I was hired under, and I communicated that as well to the respondent, so he would understand, what is it I'm looking at through this whole process. Does that
Thank-
answer your question?
Thank you, Mr. Wallet. It does.
Okay.
And Mr. Walker, are you there?
I am.
So Board Member Goff asking, you were the initial investigator here, and did you receive any written communications from the respondent disagreeing with the investigation findings initially?
Initially, I did not. The dispute I received was from the subject property listing agent who was contacted by the respondent directly. So that's how I became aware of his dissatisfaction of the board's recommendation.
So the listing agent, what did she communicate to you as far as her interaction with the respondent? Was she concerned?
She was concerned. She received, I think, several emails from them, including a letter that he wanted her to send to the board, claiming that she was wrong about the allegations. There were issues with the initial investigation, and that basically the respondent, there were no issues with the respondent. And she the listing broker made it clear that she was very uncomfortable and felt, a bit of intimidation. So that was her main concern.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Attorney Zach, are you there? Zach Fitzgerald?
Yep.
Did the respondent interact with you and pose a threat to you?
I've had a lot of conversations with Mr. Selhauer, and he did tell me earlier this week that if I did not get a last minute communication to you all, that would be a violation of my professional ethics, Rule 3.3 for candor to the tribunal. Given his history and the fact that he reported the broker, that seemed somewhat threatening to me, but it's not. I don't think it's within this. It's not like a necessary fact for the discipline, and I didn't include that as any sort of violation into what I read previously.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is Clint Taylor, board member. I have a question for Rob Walker.
Yeah.
Rob, in your interactions with the respondent, I'm trying to get an understanding of the professional demeanor of this appraiser and his willingness to answer and just his overall demeanor during your investigation and interactions. Can you talk to that?
I would say it was brief, professional. I certainly didn't think there was anything that was unprofessional about his behavior. Nothing that would, raise any initial concern. He was abrupt, might be too strong a word, so that's why I'll stick with kind of brief. Not overly argumentative or anything. That I would say was, pretty professional.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Rob. And Josh, I asked the same question to you in your investigation, the secondary one here. Same question.
So in my interactions with him, I most of the time respondents, there's a little bit of defensive just
course.
naturally. And I didn't, in my verbal interviews with him, I didn't see anything over and above that. I think the issue in terms of communications was the issue of what I was investigating, which was the communications between him and witnesses. But in terms of his interaction with me, it was professional. I would say up until the time where he scheduled the second interview at the time of his choosing, and then simply refused to meet. I think that was probably the standout in terms of my interactions with him.
Got it. Thank you for answering that, both Rob and Josh. Zach, I'm going to ask you the same in regards to your interactions with him. I'm just trying to paint the picture of getting an understanding of the gentleman and his professionalism as it associates to this case and what's been brought up. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so again, none of my communications with him or anything involving his demeanor with me forms part of the violations I read before, or what would be the case going forward. But I have had let me put it this way: he's the only respondent where I've had so many emails with him back and forth that I had to make a different folder for every month because Outlook doesn't do the 8 re's in a row anymore. It only does 1, and so every time he would respond to my response, I'd have to subcat or rename it. And so he, as far as I can tell, he agreed to stop sending communications to witnesses that could be viewed as harassing or threatening, because it is his right as a respondent to try to interview witnesses, but he can't do so in a threatening or harassing manner. I haven't heard anything else about that, but he did not listen to any of my communications telling him to stop emailing my client directly and only to email me. And then he's like I mentioned before, he's now suggested that I'm acting unethically if I did not send a document to you all before, even though he did it 3 days before the meeting. But I've been, tried to be as clear and professional with him as possible. I've explained to him multiple times that he has received more process than most respondents. Most respondents do not get an opportunity to respond to a written investigative report, and that he got to respond to Mr. Wallett's due to the unique nature of sort of the procedural process we found ourselves in, and due to the allegations he raised against the board's original investigator, and that I've told him repeatedly that he should hire a legal counsel, and also that if he has a dispute regarding the facts or law in this case, that he will have due process. That is what the ALJ hearing process is for, and that he will have an opportunity to present evidence and arguments that are within the scope of the law and are admissible in court.
Perfect. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for the explanation. No further questions from me at this moment.
Joshua, this is Board Member Goff. I have a follow-up on specifically on the sales confirmation and the report that the respondent wrote saying that he interviewed the broker during the confirmation process. Did you find this to be false, a false statement?
So I just want to clarify. So are you referring to the contract analysis? Verification of contract analysis?
Right, exactly.
Okay. I did find some problems with that, which I did detail in my investigative report. In the appraisal report written by the respondent, he refers to interviews conducted, and he names two agents. One is, I believe, was the listing agent. I'll call them Agent K for a last name. And so he said, I interviewed these two people about and he was very specific about what he said was his verification process. And that was he verified the contract's accuracy, terms, and relationships through these interviews. And the people who he claimed he contacted said that never happened. And so then that naturally became something to really track down and follow. So I talked with the respondent, and he pointed to certain emails. I believe it was like something like 12 emails. He said, well, what about all these 12 emails that these people, and especially Agent K, was on? And the topic of those emails was actually a Tidewater protocol, which is a special protocol in Veterans Administration, VA appraisals, having to do with the appraisal process and how was it listed and what property sales may support this value. It didn't have anything to do with specifically the accuracy, terms, and relationships. And so through our conversation, I learned that the respondent was considering interview to mean anything, a live interview, like on the phone, or an email interview. And so calling it an interview wasn't necessarily a problem. But when we looked at the content of the emails that he continually claimed were his research and verification of the contract's accuracy, terms, and relationships, that wasn't what was being discussed in those emails that he was pointing to. So finally, in our conversation, he said, well, actually, I guess I just assumed those. I just made the assumption about the accuracy, about the parties are not related, they're acting in their best interest, they weren't unduly motivated. So, he claimed in the report a certain method. He repeated that method multiple times verbally, and then he, at last, at the end, he claimed, well, actually, I just assumed these things. So it has to do with credibility. There's a lot in there. And I would like to point out that I in no way was opining or concluding whether or not his verification process of the contract was valid or not. There's a lot of different ways of verifying contract terms. So I wasn't judging his method. It's just the fact that the method he cited turned out to be not supported by any evidence. And in fact, he changed his story.
Could that be misleading to the client when they're reading that report specifically?
Oh, I would say it would be, yes, for sure it would be misleading. Claiming part of your scope of work is X, but then it turns out it didn't include X would be misleading.
Yeah. Thank you, Joshua.
Certainly.
This is Daisy Glassburn. I have a question for, I would assume that maybe Rob Walker would know, but if not, maybe Zach. In the process of the initial investigation, when the communications or interviews with the witnesses that were the perceived tone of those interactions were interpreted as threatening, were those conversations a part of the files that we were privy to as the board?
Well, this is Rob Walker. I was not aware of any threatening communications between the listing agent and the respondent prior to the board's actions. There was some communications, which was basically the emailing. Most of that was, I think, from the listing agent trying to email information to the respondent. That was her interpretation anyway. She also stated that she called and left messages with him several times. He never returned any calls there, and that their communication was strictly through the emails that Josh referenced. Also, as far as the potentially misleading statement about the interviews with the with both of the brokers, I did speak with the buying broker. She was never contacted at all by the respondent, and that was really pointed out. The listing broker was actually quite upset that her name was put into the report as having been interviewed when she was not interviewed. So I just wanted to kind of add a little bit of clarification on that as well.
So what I was actually meaning was your conversations with the witness regarding her feeling threatened, as well as Zach's conversations with that particular witness, that were all found or were interpreted as being threatening. Was the board able to have access to those conversations, or no?
I believe the emails were, some of the documents were provided. Basically, I forwarded everything that I received from the listing agent. So I believe, Josh, you had access to that information and the emails that he had sent, after the board's decision.
Yes, would you like me to respond to this?
Sure. I'm more looking for if there was phone conversations that were had. In terms of the emails and documented things in the file, I was able to review, but I didn't know if there were phone conversations that.
I'm not aware of any phone conversations. Okay. I don't believe.
I am also not aware, to my recollection, and the communications, I think, were either entirely or mostly email, which were provided to you. That's to my best knowledge.
Between you all and the respondent, right?
Oh, between me and the respondent, you have a recording of the interview. I did not make separate phone calls. So I have emails and the interview.
Okay. Okay.
Hey, this is Rob Stylo, Vice Chair. Josh, we voted earlier on the deficiencies in the report, but part of the board extends beyond just the deficiencies, right? We're now into ensuring the license holder is accountable and compliant. We want to uphold the public trust and safeguard the interests of the community. In regards to that, is there, I don't know how to say this delicately. We're looking at on if he's regulatable in regards to other real estate professionals and just community in general. Can you interject anything, or we're past the deficiency part of the report?
Right, I understand. Yes. I think I can comment to it. I touched on that a bit in my investigative report. Obviously, in the end, it's for the board, but I can certainly expand on sort of my overall experience in this case. I think some of what we see in terms of the communication with the regulator, with me acting on behalf of the board in speaking with him in the interview, it was difficult. For example, I gave the example earlier of the contract terms. I know we're not specifically talking about the report at this point, but to ask the same question or to have a long conversation about a particular topic and have the story change immediately at the end and say, well, actually, I didn't do those things. I guess I just assumed it. And he had already claimed in written responses. So that I think that does to some degree speak to character. There's one thing for making a mistake. There's one thing for saying, maybe, and this is not specific to this, but I'm giving an illustration. Maybe I left boilerplate in my report. Oh, it's not right. And then simply saying, you know what, made a mistake. Here's what I actually did. But instead of just re-upping and re-upping and re-upping and re-upping, and then all of a sudden changing the story, that was, I think that speaks to character. I think that speaks to ethics. And, it has to then put everything else into question. And how is this person interacting with other professionals? Because an appraiser does not act in isolation, right? They have to be communicating with a lot of parties, with clients, with the public, with property owners, with real estate agents, and other participants. I think to let me just look at my notes here, sorry. I think really the communications section of my investigative report really speaks to that in terms of what was the nature of his communication with these witnesses. And I really, I tried to reach out again, but was kind of not, that wasn't successful in terms of getting him in a conversation again. To really try to zero in on what was the nature of this communication, what was the intent of this communication, and just really hear more. Because all I had was from the first interview, him basically saying, and it's in my report, I'm paraphrasing right now, but basically he said, if it weren't for this Agent K, this wouldn't have even turned into a big deal. And that was sort of based on his belief that Agent K had made false statements to the initial investigator and so on. And so I had all the emails, which had all sorts of threats. It had a letter that he wrote for Agent K to sign to recant all of many things she had said. I had his statement in the interview saying, well, if it weren't for Agent K, and that was really the only sort of intent or motivation I could find. And then I just had to look at the plain sort of black and white. Now, there was a communication from him, I believe, in the email record where he was saying, oh, I didn't know it had come across as threatening. I'll make sure my communications from now on are not. And I believe that was to the Attorney General's office. I won't speak for them, but I believe that is an email. So that's sort of the only countervailing piece there. Everything else, if we look at the plain black and white language in written communication, it's harassment, it's threatening, it's retaliation, it's intimidation, these types of things. And I don't believe that's really extremely professional for interacting with other professionals, to answer your question. I also want to point out that he knew there was a professional step to take against this Agent K if he truly believed there was a problem. He could file a complaint against her. I believe he did. I wasn't part of that investigation. I didn't see details, but he knew there was a professional way to take this, and he chose, based on the evidence I see and read, he chose the other road, which was to be, in addition to filing a complaint, also be, harassing and threatening. So I'll stop there. That was kind of a long answer to a short question there.
Josh, that was largely the focus of your investigation, correct? Were these interactions and the validity of those,
Right.
rather than the contents of the report and things in that. Okay.
Right. A lot of what was looked at was what happened after the board, saw the initial earlier in 2024, and all those communications then started. So I was looking at a lot of conduct, communication, ethics, and that type of space.
I just want to go on record and just state that in general, it is extremely unfortunate, being that it did come before the board initially with the recommendations of specific to his report, with a stipulation and small fine and coursework, and that it has since escalated, and the focus is largely on the perception of tone in interactions with various witnesses. Is there any other discussions, or would someone like to make a motion?
Yeah, this is Board Member Goff. This grieves me to say, but I'm going to give a motion in a minute, but I want to preface that by saying that the uncooperative nature with two separate investigators working with this respondent, and he was uncooperative, and couple that with the original lie in the report where he said he interviewed, and he did not interview anybody about the contracts. Basically tone deaf to interaction with the regulators. I think we have a public trust issue here that is weighty. It weighs on me that we have a licensee of the board that is willing to threaten witnesses to a board investigation and threaten our attorney with ethics violations. With all that, knowing all that, I make a motion that we impose a maximum fine determined by the administrative law judge, a final agency order, public censure, and revocation of license.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
This is Rob Stylo. I second that motion.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I
All those opposed, say no. No. The motion passes. The next item on the agenda is policy matters. It looks like that's the agenda items for the next meeting. Is there anything on that, Marcia?
Marcia left. She had to go to another meeting.
Oh, doke. Does anybody have anything on that, on the agenda?
Don't
Okay.
believe so.
No.
Then we move to the citizen participation period. Let's see, is David still here? There we go.
Good morning, board. If any member of the public would like to bring their concerns that are not on today's agenda before the board, you may do so now by raising your hand icon, and you will be limited to 2 minutes of speech. And with that, let me jump over to the participant window and see if any hands are raised. Give it a moment here. But board members seeing none, I'll happily pass the microphone back to you.
All right, the next, we don't have any complaint investigations or licensing matters, or it doesn't look like any ESP matters as well. So we can adjourn the meeting. Let's see here. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
This is Clint Taylor. I'll motion to adjourn.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
This is Brent Goff. I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. We'll see you, looks like May 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
We-
Appreciate all involved. Thank you.